Every summer, football supporters are surrounded by transfer news. A club has submitted a bid, personal terms have been agreed, a player is travelling for a medical, a deal is worth 50 million or perhaps 50 million plus add-ons. Then, just when the transfer appears complete, another report claims the paperwork has not been registered. But what is actually happening behind the headlines? Is a football club buying the player? Who decides the transfer fee? Does the money arrive in one enormous payment? What does an agent actually do? And why can a deal collapse after the player has already been photographed holding the shirt? Welcome to the Football Brief from the Nelson Brief, where we explain the context behind the game. This is how a football transfer actually works. Let us begin with the most important point. A football club does not own a player. The player is an employee working under a contract. What the club controls is the player's football registration and the contractual right to employ that player for the agreed period. That registration allows the player to represent the club in organised competitions. Imagine that a striker has signed a 4-year contract with Newcastle United. After 2 seasons, Aston Villa want to sign him. The player cannot normally abandon the remaining 2 years and immediately begin playing for Villa. Aston Villa must reach an agreement with Newcastle to release the player from the existing contract and transfer his registration. The payment made between the clubs is what we call the transfer fee. It is effectively compensation for Newcastle agreeing to give up their contractual and registration rights before the deal expires. Two main agreements are therefore required. The buying club must reach an agreement with the selling club. The buying club must also reach a separate agreement with the player. Without both agreements, there is normally no transfer. The selling club can accept an offer, but the player can still reject the move. The player can agree personal terms, but the selling club can still refuse to release him. That is why a transfer involves three principal parties, not two. Long before an official bid is submitted, the buying club will usually have identified the player through scouting and recruitment analysis. Traditional scouts may watch the player in person. Data analysts can examine passing, pressing, shooting, movement, injury history, and performances in different tactical systems. The manager or head coach may have requested a particular type of player. The sporting director or recruitment department might then produce a list of realistic targets. The club must consider more than ability. How old is the player? How long remains on his contract? Would he qualify for a work permit? Would he satisfy the club's homegrown requirements? What wages would he expect? Does he want to join? Would the selling club negotiate? And could the entire cost fit within the buying club's financial rules? A club might therefore prefer its third choice target because the first choice is too expensive, the second does not want to move, and the third fits the club's finances and tactics. This is one reason transfer stories can change so quickly. Clubs rarely work on only one deal at a time. Once a club becomes serious about a player, contact may be made with the selling club, the player's representative, or both. However, there are rules governing how contracted players can be approached. Under FIFA's regulations, a club intending to negotiate with a professional player should inform the player's existing club in writing before entering formal contract negotiations. A player whose contract is expiring may generally negotiate a future contract when the existing agreement has 6 months or less remaining, although domestic rules and employment law can affect the precise position. An unauthorized approach is often described as tapping up. In reality, clubs frequently try to establish whether a player would be interested before spending weeks negotiating a fee. There is little value agreeing to pay 60 million for someone who has no intention of joining. An agent may therefore tell the interested club whether the player is open to the move, what salary might be required, and whether other clubs are involved. That does not mean a deal has been agreed. It simply tells the buying club whether continuing the pursuit is worthwhile. The two clubs must then negotiate the transfer agreement. Suppose Northbridge United want to sign a midfielder from Kingsport City. Northbridge offer 35 million. Kingsport demand 50 million. Eventually, the clubs might agree upon a package described publicly as being worth 45 million. But that does not necessarily mean 45 million is paid immediately. The agreement might contain 35 million in guaranteed payments, 5 million if the player reaches a certain number of appearances, 3 million if the club qualifies for the Champions League, and 2 million if the club wins a major trophy. These additional payments are known as add-ons. Some are considered easily achievable, others may be extremely unlikely. That is why one club might brief journalists that the fee is 35 million while the other insists it's 45 million. Both figures can describe different parts of the same agreement. The transfer fee may also be paid in instalments. For example, 15 million could be paid immediately, followed by two further payments of 10 million over the next 2 years. This is important because the cash payment schedule is different from the way the transfer appears in the club's accounts. The agreement may also contain a sell-on clause. Kingsport might be entitled to 10% of a future transfer fee or 10% of any profit Northbridge later makes from selling the player. Those are not the same arrangement. 10% of a £60 million sale would be 6 million. 10% of the 25 million profit above the original 35 million guaranteed fee would be 2.5 million. The precise wording matters enormously. A player's contract may also contain a release or buyout clause. This states a figure or mechanism under which the player may be allowed to leave, although the legal effect of such clauses varies between contracts and countries. A release clause can simplify the club to club negotiations. It does not force the player to accept the move. While the clubs discuss the transfer fee, the buying club must reach an agreement with the player. These are known as personal terms. The negotiations can include the player's basic weekly wage, the length of the contract, appearance bonuses, goal or clean sheet bonuses, team performance bonuses, signing on payments, image rights arrangements, loyalty payments, release clauses, accommodation or relocation support, and options allowing the club to extend the contract. A reported wage can therefore be misleading. A player described as earning 150,000 per week may have a lower guaranteed basic salary, with the rest dependent upon appearances, performance, or team success. Alternatively, the reported figure might exclude a signing on payment or image rights income. The length of the contract is also important. A 5-year deal gives the player long-term security. It gives the club great protection because the player is less likely to approach the end of the contract and leave without a transfer fee. However, it can also leave the club paying a large salary for years if the signing fails. Agents or authorised representatives help negotiate these terms. They may advise the player, communicate with the clubs, examine the contract, and negotiate remuneration. FIFA operates a licensing framework for football agents, while national associations also maintain rules for domestic transactions. The agent's involvement can create additional fees, but the exact payment structure depends upon whom the agent represents and the regulations applying to the transaction. Once the main agreements are close, the player will usually undergo a medical examination. Supporters often imagine this as a simple pass or fail test. In reality, the medical is a risk assessment. Doctors may examine the player's heart, joints, muscles, previous injuries, movement, and general physical condition. Scans may reveal an old knee injury or recurring muscular problem. That does not automatically end the transfer. The buying club could proceed as planned. It could renegotiate the price, it could offer a shorter contract, it could change the payment structure so that more of the transfer fee depends upon appearances, it could demand additional insurance, or it could withdraw entirely. A player can therefore be fit enough to play football but still considered too great a financial risk for one particular club. The medical does not tell the club whether the player will be successful. It helps the club decide whether the physical risk is acceptable. An international transfer contains additional steps. The clubs must enter the transaction into FIFA's transfer matching system, commonly called TMS. The buying and selling clubs separately upload information about the deal. The details must match. This can include the player, the clubs, the fee, the payment schedule, and the relevant contracts. The player's new national association also requires an international transfer certificate from the association where the player was previously registered. In simple terms, the certificate confirms that the player's registration can move from one football association to another. A player arriving in England may also require permission to work in the United Kingdom. The club may need a governing body endorsement from the Football Association as part of the immigration process. The points based criteria can consider factors such as international appearances, the quality of the player's current league, club appearances, and continental competition experience. A club may therefore agree a fee and personal terms but still be unable to register the player unless the immigration and endorsement requirements are satisfied. The transfer is not complete simply because the clubs have announced it on social media. The player must be properly registered. In the Premier League, the club must submit documents including the player's contract, the transfer agreement, work authorisation where required, and international clearance for overseas transfers. The league checks the paperwork against Premier League, FA, and where relevant, FIFA regulations. Only when the registration is accepted can the player normally represent the new club. Transfer windows are therefore more accurately described as registration periods. Clubs can scout, negotiate, and even announce future transfers outside the window. However, they normally cannot register the player to compete until the appropriate registration period is open. A club can also sell a player after its own window has closed when the buying club operates in a league whose window remains open. The selling club can release the registration. It simply might not be able to sign a replacement until its own window reopens. This is why different deadlines across Europe and the rest of the world can create complications. A deal can also be agreed shortly before the deadline but registered later through an authorised deal sheet procedure, provided the required initial confirmation was submitted on time. International transfers must still satisfy FIFA's TMS requirements. Deadline day is therefore not just about negotiating the price. It is a race to complete contracts, upload matching information, obtain signatures, secure work authorization, and register the player before the relevant systems close. When a player's contract expires, the player can usually join another club without the new club paying an ordinary transfer fee to the former club. This is commonly called a free transfer. The Bosman ruling of 1995 was crucial in strengthening the rights of eligible players to move after their contracts expired. However, free does not mean the transfer costs nothing. The new club may still pay a signing on fee, agent or representative fees, relocation costs, substantial wages, and loyalty or performance bonuses. Training compensation may also arise in certain cases involving younger players. FIFA's system is designed to reward clubs that contributed to a player's training and development. A solidarity contribution can also direct part of certain future transfer payments towards clubs that trained the player during the relevant years of development. The FIFA Clearing House uses player registration information and electronic player passports to help identify and distribute these training rewards. This means a major international transfer can generate payments for clubs far removed from the final negotiation. A small academy that trained the player as a teenager may receive money years later when that player completes a large transfer. A loan is officially a temporary transfer of the player's registration. The player remains contracted to the parent club but is temporarily registered to play for another club. The two clubs must decide how long the loan will last, whether a loan fee will be paid, which club pays the wages, whether the player can be recalled, whether the player is allowed to face the parent club, whether the agreement contains an option to buy, and whether it contains an obligation to buy. An option gives the borrowing club the right to complete a permanent transfer under agreed conditions. An obligation means the permanent transfer must take place if the specified conditions are met. For example, the obligation might activate if the club avoids relegation or if the player makes a set number of appearances. Loans can help young players gain experiences. They can allow an unwanted player to find regular football. They can also help a club delay or structure a permanent transfer. However, leagues impose restrictions. Premier League clubs, for example, face limits on temporary transfers involving other English clubs, including the number registered at one time and throughout a season. Imagine a club signs a player for a guaranteed transfer fee of £50 million. The player receives a 5-year contract worth £150,000 per week. Over 5 years, the basic wages alone would be approximately £39 million. The club might also pay a signing on bonus, agent costs, performance bonuses, employer costs, and additional transfer add ons. The total financial commitment could therefore be far greater than the reported £50 million fee. But football accounting adds another layer. Clubs commonly record the cost of acquiring the player's registration across the length of the contract through amortisation. A £50 million transfer on a 5-year contract might create an accounting charge of £10 million per year before other relevant costs or adjustments. This does not mean the selling club receives only £10 million each year. The cash instalments and the accounting treatment are separate. The clubs may agree one payment schedule while the buying club spreads the registration cost across the contract for accounting purposes. Suppose the player is sold after 2 years. The buying club may still have £30 million of the original registration cost remaining in its accounts. If it then sells the player for 40 million, the accounting profit could be 10 million rather than the full 40 million received. This helps explain why clubs sometimes sell academy players. A homegrown academy player may have little or no transfer costs recorded on the balance sheet. Selling that player can therefore produce a large accounting profit, even when supporters believe another player is more expendable. Football finance is not simply about how much cash a club has in the bank. It is also about when income and expenditure appear in the accounts and how they are treated under league and UEFA regulations. A transfer can fail at almost any stage. The clubs might not agree a fee, the player might reject the wages, an agent might demand different terms, the medical might reveal an unacceptable risk, a work permit might not be approved, the clubs might enter conflicting information into TMS, the selling club might fail to sign a replacement, a rival club might submit a better offer, the player might change his mind, the paperwork might arrive too late, or one of the clubs might simply attempt to renegotiate at the final moment. A transfer is therefore not complete when a journalist says it's close. It is not necessarily complete when the player travels. It is not necessarily complete when the medical begins. It may not even be fully complete when the club announces an agreement because registration or international clearance can remain pending. The most reliable moment is when the relevant competition confirms that the player has been registered. A football transfer can appear simple. One club pays money, one player changes shirts. But behind every completed deal are several connected negotiations. The selling club must agree to release the registration, the buying club must agree a contract with the player. Agents, lawyers, doctors, sporting directors, financial staff, football associations, immigration authorities, and competition administrators may all become involved. The transfer fee might include guaranteed money, instalments, bonuses, and future salon payments. The player's contract might include wages, image rights, loyalty payments, and performance bonuses. International deals require matching information, clearance, and potentially work authorization. And after everything has been negotiated, the player still cannot play until the registration is accepted. So, the next time a reporter says a transfer is 99% complete, remember what the final 1% may contain: a medical, a work permit, two contracts, international clearance, financial calculations, dozens of signatures, and one rapidly approaching deadline. This has been the Football Brief from the Nelson Brief, giving you the context behind the game. Do you think the transfer system is fair, or has it become unnecessarily complicated? Let us know in the comments and subscribe for more videos covering football, history, politics, and current affairs.